Welcome to the deep dive. So, you sent us this technical lecture focusing on database design for SAP ABAP.
Yeah, quite a specific topic.
Right. And the mission here basically is to help you grasp the core ideas, especially around designing tables and that really crucial concept of the primary key without getting bogged down.
Exactly. Pulling out the key takeaways for how this works in a real SAP setup.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start?
Well, the lecture itself kicks off with something pretty relatable, actually. Tech problems.
Ah, the classic online learning experience.
You got it. The instructor mentions issues getting the video sharing to work smoothly. And he gives this practical tip, maybe wait a couple hours after upload or watch later in the evening.
Yeah, little things like that. Good advice.
And he also makes it clear this isn't just some random session. It follows on directly from their last discussion about the SAP project lifecycle.
Okay, so there's context. And speaking of that life cycle, he outlines the main phases, which helps position where this database design stuff actually fits in.
hmm There are 5 key stages he mentions.
Let's see if I remember. Requirement gathering.
Yep,
Business blueprint.
that's 2.
That's the building part, right? Where the coding and database work happens.
Exactly. Then pre-go live, which is testing.
And then finally, support. Ongoing maintenance.
You got it. So database design is right there in the heart of the realization phase.
Makes sense. Then the conversation shifts a bit towards the job market.
It does. He contrasts hiring freshers versus experienced folks.
Yeah.
And there's this slightly surprising anecdote about someone using fake experience.
Yeah, that was eye-opening. But his point was the actual ABAP code work might be pretty similar anyway.
That's what he suggests. The task itself might not differ dramatically based on claimed experience.
Mm-mm.
He also mentioned that his course aims to teach what someone with, say, 3-4 years experience should know.
Interesting. And he talked about how companies often bring in freshers through recommendations, seeing it as less risky.
Yeah, sort of lower stakes compared to experienced hires where you really expect deep subject knowledge right away.
And that statistic, that a large number of new hires in one company might have embellished their backgrounds. Wow.
It does make you think, doesn't it? He gives the business perspective, though sometimes it's about meeting client demands quickly, and then you figure out who performed.
Performance is key at the end of the day.
Right. If someone isn't cutting it, they can be let go. Then he tackles that common worry for newcomers, this idea that there are no jobs for SAP freshers.
Yeah, he pushed back on that pretty hard.
His logic was simple. If nobody hired freshers back in, say, 2020, where would all the people with 2+ years of experience today come from?
Good point. Simple logic.
And he argues companies have actually been focusing more on freshers in the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe even up to half the openings could be for them.
But they're not always obvious,
Yeah.
right? Because of campus hiring.
Exactly. He suggests campus drives might fill like 70% of those roles, then maybe another chunk through informal networks, the so-called backdoor.
Leaving maybe 10% for the open market where you really need to show your skills.
Precisely. And then he connects this to the economy, to a potential recession.
What was his take there?
He predicts that, counterintuitively perhaps, companies might actually hire more freshers during a downturn.
Because of cost.
Yeah, cost savings. But they still need developers for system support and maintenance. So freshers become a more attractive option.
Interesting. It all comes back to needing those core skills like database design, especially if you're starting out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he mentions how freshers sometimes list tons of skills, C, C++, A, Java, but maybe only superficially.
Right. Better to have solid knowledge in one key area.
He reckons even 10–20% real subject knowledge in SAP can be enough to get that first job.
Which brings us nicely to the core technical topic, databases.
The foundation of pretty much any application,
Yes,
right?
totally. He gives a bit of history for SAP. The older ECC system, it used databases from other companies, Oracle, MySQL, others.
But then SAP built its own HAI.
Yep, launched around 2015. And the original plan was for SAP to stop supporting those older third-party databases by 2020.
But that changed. Yeah, that deadline got pushed back. Events like the pandemic played a role. Now it's 2027.
So there's still time. Learning ECC fundamentals is still valuable.
Definitely. He makes that point. You've got about 5 years. HBAN is the future and good for your career later, but ECC knowledge is still very relevant now.
Okay. And how does SAP store data?
In tables. Simple as that, fundamentally.
Uh-huh.
Which is why knowing how to design those tables is just critical.
Got it. So the core scenario he uses in the lecture is about storing employee information.
Exactly. Name, country, city, gender, date of birth, phone, education, job title, and importantly, attendance.
Right. And this leads to that classic interview question he mentioned.
Yeah, how many tables would you create for all that data?
And people guessed wildly, 3, 20.
All over the place. Which sets up the first big rule of database design.
Don't just dump everything into one giant table.
Bingo. The big problem is data redundancy, repeating information over and over again.
Like the attendance example.
Perfect example. If it's all one table, every single day you record attendance, you're also storing the employee's name, city, date of birth, again and again.
For thousands of employees, that's huge waste of space.
Massive waste. Think about memory, storage costs. It's inefficient.
Okay, so rule 1, avoid the single monster table. But
And
then...
Rule 2, don't go crazy the other way either. Avoid creating too many tiny tables.
Because that causes different problems.
It does. Suddenly you need loads more programs just to enter data into all those tables and more programs to display it.
Your whole application gets bigger, more complex.
Like your package size needs more RAM to run, and maintenance becomes a nightmare. More tables mean more places where things can potentially go wrong.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. And the key is to think about the type of data. He introduces the idea of master tables versus transaction tables.
Master data being the stuff that doesn't change much, like employee core details.
Exactly. Name, date of birth, employee ID, things that are relatively static.
And transaction data is the stuff that happens often, like daily attendance.
Perfect. Data that's frequently accessed, updated, added, attendance, sales records, things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Master versus transaction. So his first attempt at a solution involved 2 tables.
Yeah, sort of a logical first step. One table for the unique employee master data, and a second one just for attendance, maybe, employee ID, and a present absent flag for the day.
What there was a flaw?
A critical one. How do you actually link an attendance record in the second table back to the correct employee in the first table? You need a connection.
So rule 3. If you have multiple tables that relate to each other, you need a common field.
Absolutely essential. A shared piece of information that acts as the bridge. In this case, the obvious candidate is employee ID.
Right. Which leads us to probably the most important concept, the primary key.
The unique identifier for every single row in a table. You absolutely need one.
And name isn't good enough.
Definitely not. He gives that great example, common names, people with the exact same name in a big company.
The 3 sinus palacortis at Accenture.
Right. You can't rely on a name to be unique. It's like why schools use roll numbers or student IDs. You need something guaranteed to be unique.
So for the main employee table, the master table, employee ID is the clear primary key. It has to be unique for each employee.
Correct. No question there.
Mm.
But then, back to the attendance table, the transaction table, what's its primary key?
Employee ID alone doesn't work.
Nope. Because you'll have many attendance records for the same employee just on different days.
So the key needs to be more than just one field.
Exactly. And this is a key takeaway. A primary key can be a combination of fields, a composite key.
Okay, so for attendance.
He proposes using employee ID and the date together. That combination should be unique, one employee, one attendance status for one specific day.
Makes sense. That combination guarantees uniqueness for each attendance entry.
And he stresses that interviewers won't just ask for definitions, they give you scenarios, like the school database example.
Right, testing if you can apply the concepts. So the school database, what were the fields? Roll number, class, section, name, father's name, phone number.
Yeah. And the question is, what's the primary key?
Roll number alone isn't enough because different classes might reuse the same roll numbers.
Correct. Roll number 5 in class 6 is different from roll number 5 in class 7.
Can't use phone number either. Maybe siblings share one or it changes.
Right. So you have to think, what combination guarantees uniqueness for each student record? He leaves that as a bit of an exercise.
Okay. And then another scenario, the payment app.
Yeah, simple app, needs customer details and their transaction history. Again, the questions. How many tables? What are the key fields?
So applying the same logic, master data for customers.
Probably with customer ID as the primary key. Pretty standard.
And transaction data for the payments.
Right. And that's the trickier one. Customer ID alone isn't enough for the transaction table key.
Because one customer makes many payments.
Exactly. What about customer ID plus the date?
Still might not be enough, right? What if I buy coffee twice on the same day with the app?
Precisely. Same customer, same date, 2 transactions. So even customer ID plus date might not be a unique primary key. You might need to add transaction time or a unique transaction ID number itself.
It really forces you to think through the possibilities to ensure that key is absolutely unique for every single row.
That's the core idea he's drilling down on. He mentions his teaching style focuses on this deep understanding, not just clicking buttons. That's why database design gets so much time in the course.
Then he actually shows creating a table in SAP.
Yeah, using the transaction codes. He shows the 4 main screens, naming the table, giving it a title and category,
Defining all the fields and their properties like data type and length.
and setting the data class and size category. But the first time, he deliberately doesn't define a primary key.
To show the error.
Exactly. SAP throws an error. Primary key is not activated, proving you can't activate a table without one.
And he told that story about the Java developer.
Yeah, who thought you could create a table without a key in SAP. Shows how different systems work. It's fundamental in SAP.
Then he tries again, but makes a different mistake with the composite key.
Right. He creates the employee table using both employee ID and name as the primary key.
Why is that bad?
Because it means you can have the same employee ID multiple times as long as the name is different.
Oh, so you could have employee 123 named John Smith and employee 123 named Jane Doe.
Exactly. Which completely breaks data integrity. Same ID, different people, maybe different salaries. Chaos. He even showed entering data like that.
Wow. So getting that key field right is absolutely everything.
It's the heart of it, which leads to the assignments he gives you, the listener.
Right, homework time. First, figure out the primary keys for that school database scenario.
And second, design the tables how many and what are the keys for the customer and transaction payment app.
Good exercises to really apply these rules.
Definitely. He also quickly maps out the course structure design first, then practical creation. And he emphasizes needing regular attendance and practice over the 4 months.
It builds on itself, doesn't it?
Totally. He shared a story about a student falling behind after missing classes, highlighting how hard it is to catch up because everything connects.
And that final anecdote about moonlighting?
Yeah, the student with questionable experience who actually managed multiple freelance gigs successfully.
Contrasted with others who struggled. His point being,
It boils down to individual effort and practice. Talent helps, but practice is key. He uses his best student analogy.
be the best learner you can be. Good teaching helps, but your effort matters most.
That's the gist.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive. The absolute critical importance of the primary key in database design, especially in SAP. Getting it right ensures data integrity, avoids redundancy, and makes the whole system work efficiently. That seems to be the core lesson from the lecture you provided.
Couldn't have said it better. It's foundational.
And maybe a final thought for you to chew on. These principles of uniquely identifying things and structuring information logically, how might they apply outside of just databases, in organizing information in your own work, or even your life?
That's a great question. The core ideas of structure and unique identification are pretty universal, aren't they?
Definitely something to consider. We hope this helped unpack the lecture, and good luck with those design assignments. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.